What's up guys? This is Evan with Backwoods Adventure Mods. Today I want to go over our brand new DRIFTR series roof rack for the 3rd gen Tundra. Now this is a continuation of our DRIFTR series roof racks, and it's going to have the same features as the DRIFTR does for all the other vehicles, with one exception. The new Tundra doesn't provide any mounting locations on the roof, so we're going to need to drill in. Don't worry, we provide the specialized tools that you need. We'll walk through it together and you'll see that it's not difficult or scary. So let's go over what's in the box, any extra tools you'll need, and some of the features of the rack. Okay, we have everything laid out on this cart so it's easy to see. Let's start with the front fairing. It's 3/16 aluminum, and these holes on the front are for installation of one of our extrusion crossbars for support, and that will really help eliminate any vibration. On top, we have this universal slot pattern that we've created, and it accepts multiple sizes of hardware depending on which lights you use, and it allows you to install as many pod lights or Bajas or whatever lights you want, or you can use the brackets we include to put on a light bar. Next, the side rails. These are 1/4" aluminum, and you have infinite adjustability with this top slot for the extrusions. And then these big holes here you can just use as a point to grab, or you can bolt on an Agency 6 handle, and it's sized appropriately for that. Next, we've got our extrusions. You guys have really liked the fact that we use these beefy 1x3 extrusions, extra strong, easy to install, and they accept the roll-in T-nuts. Back here I've got this separated by items that you'll need to supply yourself and items that we supply. So first, this edge trim is going to go on the leading edge of the fairing and help reduce any wind noise. These are the mounts to secure it to the roof. Over here we have these spacers, which will space the mounts off the roof the right amount. We also have some clear silicone to help prevent any water leaks. This VHB double-sided tape you won't use. It's just included because this is the same kit we send with the Tacoma roof rack, so just throw this in your toolbox. Here's all the mounting hardware. Now to the rib nuts. So we're going to drill holes and install these rib nuts so we have threaded mounting points in the roof. We supply the specific size drill bit that you need, as well as a rib nut installation tool if you don't have one. I'll go over how that works at that point in the video, but I do want to point out that this little tool is going to come packaged with one rib nut on it. Throw this guy away or put it in your toolbox. It is not the right size for us today, so you're going to use the rib nuts that we send. Also, we send a stop collar so you can set the drilling depth on your bit so you don't drill too deep. And lastly is things you need to supply: a drill, a driver if you want, some metric wrenches, metric sockets, any sort of cutter to cut the edge trim to length, and this flat screwdriver we're going to use more as a scraper, a Sharpie or some kind of marker for mounting the holes, and lastly, the only drilling tool that we don't include in the kit is a standard 7/8 hole saw with a 1/4" arbor. With this rack, we're going to pre-assemble most of it and set it up on the roof as one piece. So the first thing I want to go over is putting this extrusion as a stiffener on the back side of the front fairing. We'll talk about everything related to the front fairing to prep it before we install it. You're going to grab hardware kit number 174B, which is pretty much anything pertaining to the fairing. It'll also have a light bar mount, and you won't use all of this hardware right now. And another thing I'd like to point out is that with every bolt we include a little black flat washer. You can use them at every point. I personally only use the washers when I'm putting the bolt in a slot. So for this example here, the bolt's going into a perfectly fit round hole. I don't want to use the washer just because I think it looks cleaner. There's a tube of blue Loctite in a different part of the kit. Grab it as well. So what we're going to do is take our T-nuts, and you can roll them in or slide them in, and I want to align them with these holes. So I'm going to put a T-nut in the inner and outer or front and back slot in line with each set of 2 holes here. Okay, I'm going to put another extrusion under this one. It'll make it easier to have it lifted off the table just a little bit for this next step. Then I'm going to set the fairing on top of it and do my best to line up the holes, at least on a few of them. Then I'm going to start putting the bolts in. I want to use blue Loctite, just a dab on each set of threads. Maybe, there we go. Just barely snug because I want to be able to move this fairing around to help line up the holes. And repeat with the other 6. These are all in and snug. Now I'm going to just kind of use my hands, feel, make sure that I've got this fairing centered on the extrusion. Feels flush on both ends. and I'm gonna tighten down these bolts. The last thing we're gonna do to the fairing before we install it is put the edge trim on the front. So one thing that I like to do that you don't have to do, I like to match this angle. So I'm gonna hold it out a little bit long and do my best to trim it to match the angle of the rest of the fairing. Then we'll start here and work our way around. Same thing here, I'm gonna trim it to match. All right, now let's put it on the rack. Okay, I've got it partially assembled here. I like to put in a center crossbar and the rear crossbar. I didn't use any flat washers because I chose round holes to install the crossbars instead of slots. On the fairing, we're gonna install the front fairing bolts through this slot, so I did choose washers. So I already have these other two extrusions tightened down. Now we're gonna put the fairing in and put it in the center of the adjustment and tighten it down. In the video, you'll see me using an impact to tighten these down. Be very careful if you choose to do this. You could easily strip the bolt heads or the threads if you use an impact too hard. So what I'm gonna do is just use it to sink these in just a little bit, and then I will go back and hand tighten everything to a final spec. So like I mentioned, I'm gonna center this in the slot and just snug it up. Next, we're going to install the mounting feet onto the rack before we lift it up for a test fit. So because I'm going through slots, I am going to use a washer, and you'll see 4 locations on each side rail with these double slots. So 1, 2, and then 2 more at the back. When I bolt this on, I'm going to put the bolt head on the outside. Then I'm going to do a flat washer and a lock washer and a nut. When I adjust this, I'm going to temporarily tighten it down with this mount at the lowest position compared to the rack. So I'm going to let it sit down there and tighten it down. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the remaining 7 mounts. The next thing to do is mark the location of the holes to drill. The best way to get the location is to set the complete rack on the roof of the truck. So using a friend, because it's kind of awkward, it's not necessarily heavy, but it's a very long rack. So be very careful when you set it down that you don't scratch the paint. Then you want to center it left and right, make sure it's not skewed on the roof, and then make sure you like the way it looks from front to back. Kind of match the curve of the roof to the curve of the roof rack. Now, it's a bit arbitrary because you might have a different taste than me, but a good starting point, if you want one, is to measure from the center of the rearmost mount hole to the end of this black weather strip. I've got 3.5 inches on this one, and I like the way it's adjusted. So maybe start with that, then hop down and look at it from the side and make sure you like that. Once you've got it where you want it, true, square, centered left to right, all that. Then you just grab a Sharpie or other marker and mark down through the holes, and that'll be your drilling locations. Now, these are slotted holes in the side of the rack, so if you don't get your drill bit exactly where the mark is, don't sweat it. There's a little bit of forgiveness there built in. So I'm gonna do this on all 8 mounts. We've got everything marked. Now we're gonna take this off and get it out of the way, and we'll start drilling our holes. Okay, now we're gonna start drilling the holes. Now, as you do this on your own truck, you'll probably do the same step to all 8 holes, but for the sake of the video, we're gonna go through all the steps on one hole. So if you're like me, your lines were a bit of a dash because you're marking it down through a slot. So I'm gonna find the center left to right on this rain channel. That way I have crosshairs for my drill bit. So I'm going to start out with an 1/8 inch drill bit, and I'm going to drill a pilot hole. Then I'm going to increase to a 1/4 inch. At that point, we'll use the hole saw to get rid of the seam sealer. After that, we'll drill the proper size for the rib nut, and then finally we'll set the rib nut. So we'll go through each of those in detail as we do them. So first, I'm just going to drill through the first layer with the 1/8 inch. To make it less complicated, I'm just using the arbor from the hole saw as my 1/4 inch. And I'm gonna put the included stop collar about 1 inch back just so I don't accidentally pop all the way through into the headliner. Now I'm gonna take the stop collar off and put the hole saw on. Now for this step, we're only drilling through this weather stripping or seam sealer or foam or whatever you want to call it, but it's a squishy material. When we get down to the steel, we're going to stop. You can feel it. You may not be able to tell in the video, but you can feel when you're through the seam sealer, you can almost hear it as well. So now we're going to use the straight screwdriver to scrape out what we left behind in the middle. I'm going to try to do it in one shot so I can show it to you when we're done. So that's how thick that seam sealer is there. I'm going to spend a little time scraping all the way down to the steel so I have a nice flat surface. Now we're going to jump up to our 25/64, and again I've got the stop collar set maybe about 3/4 of an inch down. Next we're going to install the rib nuts. Before we do, I'm going to use this one that came with the tool kit and show you exactly what happens in case you're not familiar. So you thread the rib nut onto the tool, just snugly till it stops. And then basically what happens is we tighten the bolt against this collar. It's going to squish the rib nut, and if we had it in a piece of metal like the roof, it would grip the hole in the roof. So let's do that on camera. You can see it starting to bulge out near the top. So that's what's happening underneath the skin of the roof. It's pinching it. So now we'll take this out and install the first rib nut in the roof. Okay, this is one that came from the kit. We're going to do the same thing we just did, except for real this time. And since I want this to be waterproof, I'm going to put a bead of silicone around the outside edge to help it seal up. Now these are just a 6mm thread, so don't over tighten, but you'll kind of be able to tell when it stops. So now we'll take the tool out, and that should be the first hole. There, now you have a threaded hole in the roof of your truck. We're going to do that on the remaining 7 holes. Okay, now we have all 8 holes drilled and rib nuts set, and the next step is going to be putting the rack back on the roof. A couple notes throughout the drilling process: the front 2 holes are the hardest to drill. I chose to do those last for that reason. The metal's double walled and it seems to be almost a harder metal, so just take your time and go slow. Also, between each hole, retighten the stop collar on the drill bit, because the last thing you want is for that stop collar to change location or to fall off while you're drilling through that last layer. On the rib nut tool, make sure that you're holding it straight and putting some down pressure on it so it doesn't try to walk up as you tighten it down. This is the most important step, so just again, take your time, go slow. Now we're going to set the roof rack on and finish the install. With the roof rack back up, we're almost ready to bolt it down. Each mount is going to sit on top of one of these black plastic spacers, and these spacers are going to drop right in those holes we drilled with our 7/8 inch hole saw. So in order to keep this from sliding around, I have already loosely installed the passenger side. I have the spacers in there and the bolts just with a few threads, just enough to keep it from sliding around, and that's temporary. I'll be taking those back out in a second. That's just to hold it in place. So now what I'm going to do is lift up on the rack, put a big bead of silicone in here, and I'm going to squish the spacer down into that. That's going to make the watertight seal between the spacer and the roof, and also the sealant will kind of spill over into the threads, giving us that last little bit of sealant that we need. So I'm going to go all around the inside edge of this hole, as well as try to get a little in the middle. So better to have too much than not enough. Squish this one down in there. I'll do the same on the rest of these, and then I'll put the bolts in and go to the other side. I'm just going to get these sort of snug because I need it to be loose enough to lift up the other side and do the same thing. Now the bolts at all 8 mounting points are basically snug. Before we can tighten it down, we need to loosen the brackets from the side so they can be pulled down to the right position. So I'm just going to back these off a little bit, and then we'll continue to tighten these down. Once all 8 of these are loose, we'll tighten down all 8 mounts. With the mounts free to move separately from the rack, now we can adjust this side to side and tighten down the bolts that go into the roof. So I've already got this where I want it. I've got the back, the middle, and the front centered side to side. Now we're going to snug down these mounts one final time. The last major point of adjustment is vertical. So in the mounts, the holes are slotted vertically. I've got the mounts tightened down just enough where I can still move it, but when I adjust it, it kind of stays where I put it. So now it's time to hop down to the ground and make sure we like the way it looks from the side. The vertical adjustment is purely up to you and what you think looks good. So right now I think it's pretty low in the front and pretty high in the back, so I'm just going to try to level that out and then match it on the other side. Make sure and take the time to step back 10 or 20 feet because that's how you'll see it on a daily basis. So I like where I have the driver's side. I'm going to tighten these down and then try to match the passenger side. With the rack adjusted and matched on both sides, next you'll want to adjust your fairing. I actually liked where this one ended up, so I didn't bring it down, but you have the option to loosen these bolts and bring it up or down to match your taste. Then the last thing I'm going to do is install the remaining 4 extrusions. Choose wherever you want. I'm going to put them in the default locations. Okay, that wraps it up. Go back through, make sure all your bolts are tight. If you have any lights, install them now. And if you have any questions, reach out to us at backwoodsadventuremods.com. Thanks for watching.